Let's bring back this, maximize, and I need to zoom it again too. In some ways, I hate to zoom this because it is, it makes it hard to move around. So I was going to make a new database. So one way to do that is right-click on databases and do new database. There's a dialog box, and we can just say what our database will be. This is probably the way you want to create it, but I'll show you another way, which is actually almost as easy. Test2. Or do we want to start Vincent? I could get you started, I guess. So let's do, I'm just going to call it Vincent's, except I want to spell it right. Don't put an apostrophe in. Yeah. So I right click on database. What? No, you can name it whatever. So a couple of things I want to show you real quickly. Every database in SQL Server has 2 files, and this is fairly typical. It could have more than 2 files, but it always has a minimum of 2 files. The 2 files are, one of them is a database, the data files. It actually contains not only the data, but all the structures like tables and things. All the information about the database is in the data files. The log is basically keeps track of every transaction since your last backup. All right. So the thing is that if you back it up and you have a total crash, that it will, you can restore your backups, and then you can restore everything that hadn't been backed up from the log. Right. So you can bring it up to the moment in time when the disaster happened. So the log is useful. They can grow really large. They're right now they're starting at 64 megabytes, which is probably bigger than they need for what we're going to do. They have unlimited growth, which is something you would have to watch for, because disks are not of unlimited size. And it shows the path where they are, and we're going to leave them there. They're in program files, Microsoft SQL Server, MSQL 13, SQL Express, MSQL, MSSQL data. In real life, this is the last place you want to put your files because it is the default. And one thing for sure is you would never have your log file on the same disk as your data file, because if the disk fails, you lose both. So but we're going to leave them there. I just want to let you know. I'm going to do OK. So we have a database called Vincent's here. And when I open that little plus, you'll see that it has database diagrams, which there isn't one yet, but we'll make one in a minute. It has tables, of which there are none. It has views. Views are basically stored queries. They give you a view of the data. We have none of those. All these folders are pretty much empty. Not everything, but most are. Security is security for the database. There's another security one underneath here that's security for the server. This is server level security. This is database level security. We'll talk about that a little later. Mostly we're going to be tables and diagrams. Just as an aside, I'm going to do a new query and show you one other way to make a database, and then we'll come back to Vince's. This is SQL. I'm just going to say create database. I have test, so I'm going to do test2. And I hit the little execute. And down here it says it was completed successfully. And if I refresh the databases, I have a test2 as well. So it's that easy in SQL to create a database.
Can you try?
You can if you want. So what I did is I clicked the new query. All right, so you have that, and then it's just create database test2 or whatever you want to name it. All I did over here, once you do something over here, you have to right click and then you have to refresh. The Object Explorer over here does not automatically refresh to reflect what you do in the other windows. It used to, but it crashed so often that they decoupled it. So you have to refresh it to show what you did. Did you run it yet? No. You have to hit that little green where it says execute. There you go. Just hit that. For that one, just. Oh. I was just showing another way to do it. You click on new query, you can write the code up there also creates the database. Well, since it had, oh, so it already is here. Don't refresh there, refresh at the database level. The Vincent's right, this is other, just,
So I'm supposed to.
well, I was just showing you could write, create a database, whatever you want to name it. Why don't you have enough? Did you run it? And then it completes the test wait, and then you need to refresh on the database. Yeah, right click on databases and refresh. Refreshing up here doesn't work. I mean, it refreshes the outer folders, but the database one, it does. You have to basically refresh on the level that you're working on, which is a pain. You can add a lot of other things to a database, create database. I mean, it can actually be like 40 lines long, but that's if you're controlling where all the files are going, controlling all of the parameters. There's a lot of parameters and stuff that you could do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but just as a right click, if we look at the properties of a database, so these are the properties of Vincent's. There's all sorts of properties that you can, you know, set and change. And you could do these all in the creation. These are like options. All of those can be set. I usually just leave them for the default unless I have a reason. But we won't worry about those right now. I do in the summer teach a database administration class where we go through a lot of those options and different things. But for us right now, they're not that important. All right, so in Vincent's, let's make a table. I'm going to show you 3 ways to do this, and I'm going to suggest that you use the 3rd way. All right, you can do the others if you want, but I'm going to suggest you do the 3rd way. So the first way is you can right-click on table, click on table, and it will give you a designer to create the table. Now the reason this works, but I do think that the 3rd way is easier. The 3rd way is to go into the diagram and use the diagram interface, because then it gives you the relations of the table. You can see everything a little bit better. So which one should we do first? Maybe customer. Let's do so like customer ID. So one of the things that we didn't do in the diagram is you have to figure out what the data type is going to be for your column. And it has a whole bunch of them listed here. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, although we can go through some. And one of the things that differs the most between one database management system and another are the names of the data types. SQL Server, in fact, all SQL, all relational databases, and SQL itself is a ANSI standard. I mean, they do an ANSI standard for SQL. You guys know what ANSI is? American National Standards Institute. All right. So they're also, what is it, International Standards, ISA or something like that, association. Anyway, it's a broad standard. The effect of that is that SQL and most of this stuff is going to be pretty much the same across things. But one of the things they say about data types is that you have to have an integer data type. You have to have a float data type. You have to have a character data type. But they don't say what you have to name them. And they don't say that you can't have 12 integer data types, which SQL Server has about that many. So, but for the most part, we're going to ignore a lot of them. And I'm just going to, like, if we want this to be a number, probably what I would do is just integer. So just int. All right, int is a whole number with no decimal points. And by default, it's, I think, a 32-bit int, which may not be big enough if you've got billions and billions of records. It's good enough for a few billion, but it's not necessarily good for, I forget where it runs out, about 13 billion. Anybody remember? I'm going to go way down here at the bottom. There's properties. As I said, this isn't the way I'm necessarily going to advise you to do this, but there are properties down here. And I could scroll down. Some of the properties are the one I'm looking for, which is really hard in this Zoom, is identity specification. And if you change that to yes, and for what we're going to do, it's not that important. Because you could, we're only going to enter a few records, so if you have to enter the numbers manually, that's not a big deal. But what this does is it will enter the, it will auto number that field. You can only have one identity, one auto increment. You can only have one per table. Typically, it's put on the primary key. And what this increment in seed says, it's going to start at 1 and it's going to count by ones. You could say I want to start at 1,000 and count by 10. So you can do whatever you want. So that's way down in the properties at the bottom. Is identity.
Yeah, you said it's yes.
So you find is identity and you change it to yes. Click the little arrow beside it. So put in there,
Yes.
so you need to do like custom ID. And type this one. So click the little arrow beside it. Yeah. And then where it says there's identity, then you can change that. You have to use this little arrow. You know, click on it to get these, and then you change is identity to yes.
We can change the start number and they go up by
Yeah, you can change whatever start number to whatever you want it. So the increment is by 1. The seed is where the start number is. So this is there are just properties down there. Again, for what we're doing, it's not that important that you do the auto numbers. I just wanted to show you how to do it because we're only going to enter like 5 or 6 records per table. So if you have to number them yourself, it's not a big deal. But if you got billions of them, it's nice to have it auto numbered.
Repeat that list.
What?
Repeat that list.
I'm just saying that for what we're doing, it's not that important to have the auto number, the increment, because we're only going to enter a very few records. Do you need a repeat of where you get the identity?
I'm just doing the video. I can't hear all the actions on.
Oh, okay. So basically, I just made it an integer because we're going to number it. It doesn't have to be an integer. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click there and I'm going to say set primary key. So customer ID is going to be the primary key of the table.
I'm sorry, I missed what we're hearing, how we got into this entry field.
So you right click on tables and do table. You got there?
Yeah. Wait, tables. I got file tables, I got external tables.
No, just right click on the word tables.
Okay.
There you go. So I said this is one way to do it. This isn't the way I would necessarily advise, but it's okay. What else were we going to have about the customer?
Last name, first name, email, phone.
So with these, most of these I would do like an in-car, in varchar. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but varchar, anybody know what varchar is as opposed to car? Variable, yeah. So basically these are variable characters. That means it'll adjust the width depending on what you write in there. In-car or car is fixed width, and it'll write the same number of spaces no matter what you actually put in the field. There's a trade-off with these. The in-varchar is better on disk space, but it requires more processing because it has to figure out the length of everything that you enter. Whereas car doesn't have to do that. It just stamps whatever the size is with the characters. So it takes less processing, but it's more wasteful of disk space. Which matters, it depends on your setup. Generally, I use the varchar though, unless I know it has a fixed width, like phone number or something.
So what's the 50?
50 is how many characters it is max. Now, the maximum you can do on these is 255. And I lost my paren, so I need to get that back. That's the max that you can do and have it as a searchable field in the database. What?
I just can't hear you. Okay. Can you at least whisper?
So I was just saying that the maximum size for an in-varchar is 255. And I tend to put it that because it's variable width anyway.
So are we doing
Yeah, do that. This is whether or not you allow nulls, right? Nulls mean, is it required or not? If I uncheck that, it's required. I'm just going to do customer first name. And I'll do the same thing in varchar. Oh, the other thing about in, and we can make it 255 or whatever. 50 is usually enough, but I'll let the first name be optional. So the in on in varchar, anybody have any idea what it stands for? Unicode. It means Unicode. Why are you doing that? Unicode. If you're using the in varchar, it's Unicode. If you use just varchar or car, it's ASCII. You guys know the difference between ASCII and Unicode?
No.
No. ASCII has 255 characters. The reason is it's what you can store in a byte. So ASCII is basically what's on your keyboard, right? But Unicode has every language on earth, literally. You can write in Cyrillic, you can write in Greek, you can write in Korean, right? All the languages on earth, and including some non-languages, real languages, such as Tolkien's Elvish and Klingon from Star Trek. They're also in Unicode. So, I mean, it's a huge set. And modern computers use Unicode. It's built into the processor. They know the character sets for all the languages. So the in here is for Unicode. So I generally use it. It allows you, if you need to, you can enter non-English characters. If you do varchar and char, you're limited to just English characters, right? So we wanted email. And I'll do exactly the same in varchar, and I'll do 255. And the phone depends on how you want to enter the phone. I might do it as a car. How many characters are there in with a area code 334 10? So we could leave it as 10 if you leave out the dashes and the parentheses. That's a decision to make, although usually a lot of times the decision is based on if you're going to use a dialer or something, how it wants the number. I would probably I usually don't put in the dashes or the things for that.
Could you write 12 just in case you...
So you could, although it helps if it's consistent. So actually with the dashes, with the parentheses and the dashes, is it 12 or 13?
I would just stick the dashes in.
Yeah.
It's 3 more if you do parentheses, 1, 2, and then 1 dash.
So it's up to you. It really is entirely, like if you want them formatted, then you would definitely want to include enough for the formatting characters. And this gets a whole lot more complicated if you're doing international phone numbers. Yeah, so you have to decide what you're...
You decide not to use dashes.
I wouldn't, for a couple reasons. One, you're never going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide it. The other thing is that there are, I don't know if there are phone numbers, but I do know there are area codes and things that start with 0, which is illegal in an int. It's not really illegal, just drop it.
So comes between numeric and numeric.
So numeric is a float, so it has decimal parts.
That's why I'm looking at numeric for decimal point.
No, you certainly wouldn't use numeric. I generally do not make, even though they look like numbers, like social security numbers, phone numbers, area codes, I usually don't, or not area codes, zip codes, I usually don't make them numbers, I make them characters. Again, if there's any leading zeros, they would be dropped if you make them as a number. Sometimes if you put them in a number form, it'll turn them into scientific notation, which is really not what you want. There are lots of reasons not to make them into numbers if they're not going to be used as numbers, right? I think that's good enough. I'm going to let that one be nullable because we said that the phone number was optional if they wanted to give it or not. If you make it so that there's a check mark there, or not a check mark there, I do want a check mark there, actually. The email, I don't. I want the email required. I want this where it could be left blank. And again, if you're not careful about what you leave blank or don't, it can be a problem later. If you don't have that information, it won't let you go forward if you require it. So I'm going to save this, and the easiest way to do that is to click the little disk. And this is where I can give it a name, and I'm going to name it customer. And I'm going to do OK. And now if I open up tables, we've got a customer table, right? And if I open up the plus by that, it has the columns, the keys, the constraints. So when I click on the columns, it shows me each of the columns we just did. It has a little key by the primary key. but it'll also have the PK customer down here. Right, it creates the key. There's some other stuff you can see there. I think it has one index. Yes, it automatically indexes on the primary key. We're not going to talk much about indexes, but they're important when you get to try to optimize a database later. So, questions about that? This is number one way to make a table. As I said, I'm going to show you. 3 is very similar to this. It's just in the designer. Questions? Okay. So the second way you may not, this is actually how I would do it. I'm going to go back to the query. Yeah.
Okay, it's not allowing me to save any changes in the update automatically.
What is it not allowing?
So I something like that.
Just,
Is it saving it automatically?
no, so go to tools. Go to now. I'm probably gonna have to do that.
Wait, to do what?
What? Where is it not letting you save?
We should just.
All right, so the way to do it, if it won't let you save your table, if you go to Tools, Options, Designers, there's a little thing here that says Prevent saving changes that require table recreation. If you uncheck that, it'll let you save. The reason why that's checked by default is that if you make a change to a table with data in it that requires the table to be dropped and recreated underneath, you could lose your data. Right, but we don't have any data at this point. I'm just going to do OK, and then it should allow any changes that you want. So Tools, Options, Designers, Table and Database Designers, uncheck that last checkbox if you're having trouble saving things. For what it's worth, it took me hours to figure that out at one time. This is, this is a new piece of software. You probably haven't ever worked with anything like this exactly. So don't be surprised if it's a little bit weird and hard to get around in. It takes a while, and it's a fairly complicated piece of software. So the second way to create a table is in the SQL. This is the way I would do it, but you have to know SQL, so I'm not expecting much, but I will do another simple table. First, I'm going to say use Vincent's. It is not, actually. It's a nice thing about SQL. It is not case sensitive. One thing, in most systems, you would need a semicolon here. I can highlight that and execute it. And it's just the one, if you highlight it, it'll only execute the line you highlight. So it says it completed successfully. Another way you could do that is if you look up here, it says Vincent's in that little dialog box. Yeah.
You have to use the little semicolon.
No, not in SQL Server.
In MySQL.
In MySQL or Oracle or actually any other system I've ever used, you have to have the semicolon. It's probably good practice. What SQL Server does with the semicolon is it ignores it. Doesn't throw an error, but it doesn't actually honor them either.
Did yours throw an error?
No. I said it doesn't throw an error. Yours did throw an error?
It says the database already exists. Choose a different name.
Right, that's because highlight just use Vincent's. Well, that's the other one.
Okay.
you can't create the database twice. So notice how I've highlighted this. It'll only execute the highlighted line. So you don't have to like erase everything if you don't want. So I'm going to, what's another really simple table in our thing? Also, I did put a PDF of the diagram in the modules if you want to look at it when you're doing this too. Artist is pretty simple and it doesn't have any, yeah, I mean, I could show you how to do a foreign key, but let's do, so I'm going to do create table. I think artist is be all right. So I'm going to do artist. I'm going to do a parentheses and an end parentheses. If you are a programmer, every instinct may want to do curly braces there, but it's just a parentheses. I am going to say artist ID. It's going to be an integer data type. And I'm going to do that identity. And I'm going to make it a primary key. I'm just going to have artist name. Is there anything else we had in artist? That's probably good enough anyway. So there's always a comma after every thing until the last one. If you were doing this in another, something other than SQL Server, you'd put the semicolon there after the parentheses. So if I highlight that and execute, so again, down below it should just, it says execute it successfully. If I go to tables here and right click and refresh, I have an artist table as well. And if we look at the artist table, it has the artist ID and the artist name. So it does the same thing as the designer. Did you refresh? Refresh on the table. And then hit the carriers. It doesn't show up automatically. Anything you do over here does not show up automatically over here. You have to refresh. And you have to refresh at the level of the folder that you're working in. Bit of a pain, as I said. Now you don't have to do this. I'm going to show you some other SQL we'll do with some queries and stuff. But as I said, this is the way I would do it because it's actually the fastest and most efficient way to do it. But you'd have to have some idea of the language. SQL is not a hard language, at least at the initialize. It's fairly English-like. We're creating a table. These are the fields. These are, you know. What? Oh, so remember we did the auto number? Microsoft calls the auto number identity. So I'm saying start at ones, count by ones for the auto number. Okay. If you really are interested in this at some point, I can show you how to do foreign keys. I suppose I could do one here, but do you want to see the other designer first? So this is what's coming up is the way I would advise doing this. So under database diagrams, I'm going to do a new database diagram. Now this comes up and it worries people, but that's actually just fine. I'm going to say yes. Yes.
I have lots of spreadsheets that have complicated formula in them, and a lot of people use them, and so I have protections on them. So like, if you're gonna change something, it's like, hey, do you really want to do that? But it's not like because you're not supposed to. It's just like make sure, you know.
There's actually
kind of like the same way, isn't it? Like just a protection, make sure like.
For that,
Yeah.
it just means that it doesn't download these elements unless you have them. I mean, unless you want them, right? You actually will find that Access has very few protections. It will not even give you the hint of a warning if you are about to delete all your records in a table. It'll just do it. No, are you sures? So I'm going to add the two tables we made, artist and customer. I'm going to add those, and then I'm going to close it. Now, they're in the designer, okay? This designer is a little bit like Visio, except that it's, when you make something in here, you're really making it. Yeah. Did you say that? You said- We have artists. So what I'm going to do, let's add another table. So I'm going to right click in here. Notice I can add a new table. Just in the white. Yeah, literally anywhere in here. All right, so it's asking me to give a name to the table. Which one do we want to do next?
Inventory.
Inventory. Do we have everything we need for inventory? No. We could do it, but for relations and stuff. Let's do album first. I do want to do some foreign key stuff too. I might let you guys do. So notice this looks just like the designer that we were just using, except we're in the graphical designer here a little bit. So for the album, we had the album ID, and the data type would be int. You can just type if you want to. Again, I'm doing all these as that. There are properties over here on the far side. And if you wanted to make it an identity, notice these are the same properties that were basically at the bottom on the other side. So where it says identity specification, no. And again, it's not crucial if you don't do this. I can change that to a yes, except I have to get all the way over here. Why is it not doing that? Am I in the field? There. Oh, here. Why is it not doing that? Yeah, I know. Why is it grayed out?
Because you're manual.
Possibly. Yep. Good eye. Good. Anyway, as I said, it's not super important to do that. I'm going to set a primary key. And again, I just right click on it to do that. Right click to set primary key. The auto increment is nice if you're, but it can also be annoying, just to let you know, when you're trying to do the data entry. If you don't do it, that means you manually have to enter the keys, whatever they are, 1, 2, 3. And that's okay. We're only going to enter 4 or 5 records per each. Is that okay? Guys all right with me? So I just wanted to show you how to do it. The properties are over to the side. If they're not there, you can always right click and say, well, let's get in here. Properties. Everything's a right click. It can drive you nuts. A lot of the stuff in the right clicks isn't on the upper level menus either. So we got the album title, right? And I'd probably do the in varchar. And I'd probably not allow it to be null. Is there anything else? What else did we have about the album? What? Just those two? You could, genre is a question that depends on how you want to deal with it. Like, is an album only one genre? Probably. You could put genre there. So we were talking about putting the year in the inventory. So do you guys want genre in here?
No.
No? Okay. All right, now if you want to change the way this looks, in the table view, you can go to just column names. And the way I get to table view is as in the blue. Right click, table view. So standard brings you back out to the designer. And then columns just shows the columns. You can also reduce it to just keys if you just want to show the relationship of keys. All right, so we've got album and artist, and then we need an intermediate one between album and artist. And I'm going to show that, and then I may let you guys kind of move forward on your own if you guys have some idea. There are a couple of other things I probably need to show you about data types. At the top, in the row. So, yeah, you're showing. All right, so I'm going to do an intermediate table. I'm going to just do this as new table. Yes, exactly. And we'll call it artist album or album artist, whichever way you like to go. Right, so this is a linking table. And we can move it if you don't want it right there. So I'm going to do artist ID, and I'll just make this an int. And I'm not going to allow nulls. And I'm going to do album ID and int. Okay, so I'd make these into a composite key. If you wanted to make a different primary key, you could. But the way I do a composite key here is I click on this, I hold the control key down and click on the next one. And then I do set primary key. So you have to use the control key to select them both. Does that make sense? Oh, and so you click on one, you hold the control down, and you click on the other. But you need to do it in the edge over here, not inside the field. So on the edge over there, so I click there, I hold the control key down, and I click there. And then what I did is I added the primary key. Now I can remove it, but and I'm going to go back to columns. So I want to make the relationships here. I'll give you a second if you need it. Are you guys all ready for it or no? Yeah. You got it. You guys okay? Yeah. Yeah, you can't. You either have to. You can alter a little bit. They have one drop with them. When you drop it out, you just need to drop it out.
Oh, I get it.
It's okay. Well, it's not yourself.
Right.
I definitely. That's everything. Yeah.
I like it.
The way that we're doing
You
this
like
with
that?
integers is every primary key, does that mean we're just going to be dealing with no artist, customer,
Right, it does.
would it be better to use something that's like name and
I don't know.
Yeah, see.
One of the things about the keys is that it's mostly
Committing.
mostly for the computer to make decisions. You would be right where you want to be.
And I guess that's. the point.
Yeah.
You're gonna write the report, you're gonna do it here, you're gonna bring the actual information once. But the computer's gonna find it.
Yeah, that's a.
Yeah, right.
So did you make your Yeah, we don't have any consultants. Let's. Means they're not safe. So I want to show you how to do the relationships, and then I think you're actually almost ready where you could start working on finishing the rest of the database. And I'll help, of course. So what I'm going to do, these are both foreign keys as well, right? Because there's a relationship there. This is a lot like Access at this point. If I grab the key, and it's important you grab the key and drag it, and it's also important that you drag it to the right field. So I'm dragging album ID to album ID. I'm going to let that go. And down here, I have a dialog box. And basically it says that it's going to name the foreign key FK artist album _ album. If you want to change that, you can, but mostly I don't. The primary key table is album, and the foreign key table is artist album and the album ID. The thing that's important about this is to check your primary key table and your foreign key table and make sure they're correct. And make sure these two fields are correct. Because it will happily link to the artist ID. And if it does, you'll have a total screw up when you try to enter data. So I'm going to do OK. And I'm going to do OK again. Right? There are things you can set here. But for the most part, we don't want to. So we're going to say OK. So we just want the defaults. It has a little bit different picture than, it doesn't have the crow's foot. The key is the primary side. This, which looks like, to me it looks like a chain link, but it's supposed to be the infinity side. One to many, one to infinity. The key side and the infinity side. Yeah, and I'm going to do the same with artist. I'm going to grab the key, drag it on top of the artist field, make sure that it's the right fields, right tables. I'm going to do OK, and then we're just going to leave the properties the way they are and do OK. Now, I'm going to save this, and you can save it at any time, and it probably is worthwhile doing it once in a while. So I'm going to save it. It wants to know what the name of the diagram is going to be. You can name it whatever you want. I'm actually just going to leave it diagram 0. It tells me that I have 3 tables to save. I'm going to do yes. And if I refresh on the tables over here, notice that I have the album that I did with SQL. I have, well, actually the album I did in here. Artist I did with SQL. The artist album I did in here. And that. And you can also see, like if I do artist album and I look at keys, it has the primary key, but it has the foreign keys as well. This is the mode in which I think you have your best luck designing. I mean, building Vincent's Final. Yeah.
I'm sorry. My diagram isn't working. You can show me how to write a select statement.
Well, let's just do.
Do you want us to build a new database? Put all these tables in
For those of you with the error message on the diagram, I guess you could. It might be. You're gonna do properties. I'm going to do file. So I did actually for the moment.
Oh, you
Get rid of it.
make sure
Uh,
right now.
We'll change all of that.
Oh, you might say.
Just that's it. Okay. And then right click on that. Should be, yeah, just add it. Anyone else having an error on the diagram?
Tell me how to fix it, because I haven't even been in there to get to even follow.
Oh, so what you probably need to do is you need to change the owner of the database to SA. So if you're having an error on the diagram, that's a different error. I'll fix that in a moment. 99% of you do not need to do this. If you go to properties on the Vincent's, go to files. If you wipe this out and just write SA, this is a horrible thing to do for security, but it's system administrative. It will give you, it'll make everything work, which is all I care about at this point. So if you have that error, yeah.
So when we're done with the being system administrator, can we just change your back later?
Possibly. I think it's what happens is that when was it David that made that, he used a different account than the machine name. So I didn't get the machine name and full admin. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question when you get back?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm
Goodness.
I'll show it to you. So I didn't even get to that part. I didn't know where to go from
Take her password, like we, capital P to add symbol.
Yeah.
there. So it looks like I'm doing the PSS.
And add
You
symbol,
have to refresh.
you add symbol,
Yeah, refresh tables. and
S
refresh.
P A.
so capital P.
Yeah.
So then shift to,
So one other thing I want to do,
Okay.
2 seconds on, and then I'm going to let you guys work on just seeing if you can come up with the rest of the things. So just real quickly, I'm going to open up a new table. I'm actually just going to leave this as table 1. I wanted to mention a couple of the other data types you might need. All right, so this is the last little bit. You might want date, right? So date gives you the current date, the year, month, and day. Not current, you can put any date in there. Date time gives you the current date and time, right? Both of them. So, and then I wouldn't worry about the offsets so much. Those are basically if you need to know the offset from Greenwich Mean Time. For money, you could use decimal. All right, so decimal is, can go up to 18 digits. What the two numbers are how many are on the left side of the decimal point and how many are on the right side of the decimal point. So if I did 018, every number would be point and have 18 digits to the other side. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Float just does it freeform, however many decimals show up. It's not as precise as decimal. I don't think you're going to need geography or geometry. I don't think you're going to need hierarchy. Image is deprecated. You shouldn't use image. If you need an image, there's a binary max, which we can look at. You can use money. If you don't want to use decimal, you can use money for money. Sounds like it's obvious, and probably you do. The only thing is a lot of people are disturbed by the fact that the money data type has 4 decimal places. Why does it have 4? I don't know. Banks go out farther than 4, so I can't resist for that.
Especially in retail environments, sometimes to get rounding correct, you need to be able to go out further.
Yeah, when banks go out as many decimal places as they need. So, I mean, they make huge money by trading in fractions of pennies. Did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You don't have to be sorry. I just saw your hand up. So we got the InvarCar Max I would not use very often, if at all, but InvarCar Max lets you enter like a whole document. You can have up to 4 gigabytes of text in an InvarCar Max, but it is not queryable in the database. It's just got a pointer in the database that points to it. InvarCar Max is just it's for blob data, basically. You can retrieve it, but you can't query its content. Does that make sense? Because it's not part of the actual database. There's only a pointer to it in the database. We're not going to worry about real or small daytime or small int or small money. You can do those if you want, but text is deprecated. Time you can use if you want to do just time, right? So there's date time, there's date, and there's time. The 7 there just means that there's a number telling what kind of precision you want on time. Do you want to just go to the minute, to the second, to, you know, how many digits you say is how far out it goes. It's in military time, right? So if you want to say it's 1 o'clock, it's 13, not 1. You say 1, that's 1 in the morning. So it's in military time. Var binary max is what you would use for pictures. Don't bother for now. But you can put pictures directly into the database. You can put videos in the database. You can put whatever you want in the database. Up to, I think it's also up to 4 gigs. It might be a little bit more. Retrieving them can be more of an issue because you have to stream them out somehow.
Would you want to use timestamp or time?
So a timestamp is literally what it says. It's just a stamp of that instant of time. So it depends on what you're doing. Does that make sense? If you want to, like if you're entering transactions, a timestamp might work because it'll give you that exact instant of time, usually to the nanosecond. Whereas time is what you want to use if you're like setting up a schedule or something, right? Because then you would just say there will be a meeting at 1300 hours somewhere, where a timestamp wouldn't work for that. Does that make sense? Yeah. XML is kind of a neat data type, but we won't worry about that. I'm curious. Yeah.
I have one column in my customer table for the mailing list. That would be a bit data type, right? Because essentially I want that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's actually a good, bit is what they have for Boolean.
Okay.
Bit is 0, 1, true, false. Right, because, well, bit is just has 2 values, 0 or 1. And that's what they use for true, false. 1 is true, 0 is false. Weirdly, though, when you enter it, it will be true or false. I mean, that's, you actually use the word, even though it's just a bit. All right, so I'm going to delete this because it's not doing anything. One of the other things I want to show you, and then we may or may not. What time is it? Is it?
It's like 12:15.
All right, let's not show it. Let's do this next time. So next time, what we'll do is we'll finish building this. I will give you the whole class to do this. It took most of the class just to get ready this time. And if you need, there is a video of what we've done so far. Next class, what we will do is we'll build out Vince's database. I'm going to let you guys do it, and I'll circulate and help you. And then we can start entering some sample data. And I'll show you how to do that next time. It's actually quite easy. It'll be a bit of a pain. And then we will, hopefully by next week, we can do some queries on it. And then we'll move on to MySQL. Yeah.
How do we say where we have to find?
So make sure you save your diagram if you're in your diagram. So I would just click on, you can either do file save, or you can do that little dialog box. I'm looking to see if I have, it didn't give me the little dialog box where it tells you what to save because all mine was saved already, hadn't made any changes. But make sure you save everything. It's probably a good idea, once you've done that, to close out. You can save all. I'm not going to save my SQL, although you can.
Oh, that's when you created it by.
By the SQL.
creating the table. Okay.
And you can save it if you want. Well, I'll save it just to show you how. So I'm going to say yes, and it's going to ask me, instead of SQL query 1, I'll just say, basically it was the artist table, right? And it'll have a .SQL. Yeah.
Shut down, guess.
And then diagram 0 is fine.
Are we supposed to pause it?
It says that you should shut down your guest before powering on. You powered off, I'm powering. So that's it, right? Down, sign out. Nice.
Just So the other thing that I would do is then let me see, before I would close out. I actually think this is your best strategy for just making sure that nothing goes wrong. Close out of SQL Server. And then it's actually not a bad idea to close out of Windows. So I actually want to do power. I want to do shut down. I do not want to update and shut down, but it might be better than update it next time. Did I say update and shut down, or did I say update and restart? I want to shut down. And then when it's shut down, so I'm going to get out of this mode. Then you can close everything out and log out. If you need to leave right now, you can also just suspend it. It's just that suspending it is a little dangerous, but it's probably fine this time.
I have questions. Do you have
Sure.
a lecture in another class?
I have a class at 1. Yeah.
Is there a class in here?
Yes.
Okay, just real quick on this. Because I didn't get to the point where I could follow you. I wrote it down, but so I finally it. So what's the password I'm using to get to the virtual machine?
Should just do password, admin. So this won't let you in?
No, I wasn't able to figure out how to get to that point when you were going through the whole thing, so I just waited on your machine. So when I get to this part, I hit share via.
Yeah, you don't
What's
need to
the
go.
password?
You don't need to go into shared view.
You took me in the other way.
Yeah, and that's fine. So you're in here. Let me just do- Oh, no, you can't. That's much better than that.
I was trying, and then you guys said, well, no.
So what do you need to do? So
So
you're in the
I-
virtual machine now.
Okay, so I am in there, and then where do I go from there? To get into where you-
So you want to go to, I think it'd be like Microsoft. Probably better way rather than that is just do this. Come down to SQL Server, SQL Server tools, and then manage. Yeah, and then it should come on. Yeah, be there in a second.
And now, did you find out if this class is for free to put in?
It should be on Fridays, but I haven't found out who to talk to. Yeah,
This is the
so
only place that I can work on this.
pretty much for this. The other things you might be able to do elsewhere, but I am going to give you all of the next class.
Well, the
I
aerospace
just
stuff
need more
is
to
kind
do
of
that. So this should connect and it should be.
I already
So one of the things, Wednesday.
All right.
I'm going to make a point of getting this started. But yeah, don't be too polite. You have to write.
All right, thank you.
Because I could have cut. I mean, you saw I was helping other people. You have as much right to that as anyone. And we also should have. Oh, why is it not doing? I think I know it. So we need to do.
First search term.
I mean, if I could get in here early, I'm gonna come in early and do it so I can get caught up to what everybody else.
Yeah, we haven't done too much yet. Most of this was just showing them how to do things. So I think I can catch up pretty quickly. I will try to be here a few minutes early on Wednesday.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, so I just X out of this. If I have nothing in here, I can just X out.
Right now, we have that template. And what I need is a paragraph. Times not all get access to yeah. One of those things is widespread. Right.
Yeah, I think it's all in the version. So you. I was asking if you wanted to say
The number of services.
Or you can. Not much here. You actually just and you do like the SQL files, but you can't save them on the front drive or and then you shut that down. Yeah.
Shut down the windows.
Yeah, I would shut down the windows and then shut down the VM and then log out. So I will see you on Wednesday a little early.
Stuff for the body.
So, yeah.
Question, did we turn in the revised yet?
Yeah, you can. And if you don't have a good revised one, then you could just turn in my PDF or whatever too.
I think my original was pretty good.
I think it was. I think actually yours was fine. So
I didn't do the album, the artist album linking table.
oh, okay. Yeah, I think you just did it. That's okay though. If you want to add that, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever you get to it, I'm not too worried about the dates.
Okay.
We will, as I said, it'll be all open lab on Wednesday. Yeah, it'll be. This class for these last two have been pretty chaotic with the install.
Yeah. So I started setting mine up.